So as we had discussed before, today inshallah will be a summary of the entire Meccan Seerah. So we're going to begin from the beginning and then work our way to the Hijrah, so that we're catching up inshallah ta'ala after this break. It's also a new year for our academic studies. As you know, it's 2013, so we need to catch up to summarize all that we have done before we move on. So let us begin from the very beginning. And the very beginning, we go back to the days of Jahiliyyah. We go back to the days of pre-Islam. The Arabian Peninsula was occupied by a number of people, and we can divide them into three simple categories. Three simple categories of those who lived in Arabia. The first are those who are the ancient Arabs. Examples of them are Ad and Thamud, the ancient Arabs. We really don't have much history about them, and they don't have any descendants. So these are they're called Al-Arab al-Ba'ida, which is the extinct Arabs. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were two other groups of Arabs. And these groups, both of them were called Al-Arab al-Baqiya, the remaining Arabs. So we have Al-Ba'ida, which are the extinct Arabs, and then Al-Baqiya, the remaining Arabs. The remaining Arabs, either at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, were of two camps. Who can remind me quickly? Adnan and Qahtan. The Adnan and Qahtan. Now, both of these Adnan and Qahtan, they go back to? No. They go back to? Adnan, Qahtan go back to Adnan? No. 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 Qahtan has nothing to do with Ismail. No. Adnan and Qahtan, who did they go back to? Both of them. We went over this. This is a quiz question for a year and a half ago. Long time. Some of you don't have your notes from back then. They go back to Sam. They go back to Sam, the son of Nuh. And so they're both Semites. They're both Semites. Okay? And Qahtan are called Al-Arab Al-Ariba. And these are, let's say, the original Arabs at the time pre-Islam. And Adnan are called Al-Arab Al-Musta'riba, the Arabs who came into Arabia. Okay? So Qahtan are the Arab Al-Ariba, which means the Arabs who were living for hundreds of years before the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, before the coming of Ibraheem, before the coming of Ismail. The Arab lands were occupied by groups of Arabs. We call them basically descendants of Qahtan. And Adnan, who is Adnan? Adnan is a descendant of Ismail. Adnan is a descendant of Ismail. Okay, so the story goes, when Hajar was left in Mecca with Ismail, a group of the Arab al-Ariba, i.e. the Qahtanis, passed by. And these were the tribe of, quickly, which tribe? That Ismail lived with, married into. The tribe of Jurhum. The tribe of Jurhum. Okay, so Ismail was raised in Mecca. He intermarries into the tribes of Jurhum, and the Adnan and the Qahtani tribes since that time have been intermixing, even though of course we can still distinguish in terms of male lineage, which is Adnani and which is Qahtani. And the time of the Prophet ﷺ was preceded by a number of very interesting occurrences that took place. Of the most important of these occurrences, the tribe of Jurhum, and Ismail Alehissalaam married into them, the tribe of Jurhum became the controllers of the Kaaba. And they are basically descendants of Adnan, even though they're also descendants of Qahtan, right? Descendants of Ismail and descendants of Qahtan. So for a while, the tribe of Jurhum rules over Mecca. Then a number of internal revolts take place. So we're talking about over 3,000 years of history. A number of internal revolts take place, and the Jurhumites basically become more and more rebellious and evil, and therefore one of the other tribes, the tribe of Khuza'ah, and the founder of this tribe is Amr ibn Luhay, and he is mentioned in hadith, Amr ibn Luhay al-Khuza'i. The tribe of Khuza'ah then ejects Jurhum, gets rid of Jurhum, and this is when Jurhum buried all the treasure. They buried all the treasure around the Kaaba, right? So they gets rid of the tribe of Jurhum, and Amr ibn Luhay, the tribe of Khuza'ah, then takes over the Kaaba. So the Jurhumites are expelled, the Khuza'ites are now in charge. And Amr ibn Luhay was their first chieftain. He was the one, according to our Prophet ﷺ, who introduced idolatry. The Jurhumites, no matter how bad they were evil. It is said that they would basically take advantage of the pilgrims, and they were greedy, but they were not mushrikun. They didn't do any shirk. So the people wanted to get rid of them. The Khuza'a basically kicked them out. They became charge of the Kaaba. But the Khuza'a did something much worse. And they introduced idolatry for the first time. Now, we don't have exact dates, but roughly it is said, and rough calculations might show, that around 200 of the Christian era, right? So basically around 400 years before the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, 4 centuries before the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, Amr ibn Luhay al-Khuza'i, he was the chieftain of the tribe. When he kicked the Jurhumites out, he went to Syria for a business transaction, and the people of Syria were the Amaliqa. They were giants in the land. It is said they had a flowering civilization. He was impressed with them, and they were idol worshippers. And so he took the god of Hubal, which is an ancient, they say that is an ancient Greek or Roman god as well, Allahu Alam, but they have this theory that is one of those ancient gods. He took the actual idol of Hubal. They gifted him one of their real idols. So he took the idol of Hubal and he brought it in front of the Kaaba. And this was the beginning of idolatry. Now because it's a new season, new era, new tribe has come in, so the people were willing for change. And so the Khuza'a tribe, Amr ibn Luhay, introduced many of the evil things, and he also introduced some good things as well in terms of structure, in terms of government. And the tribe, and he was also the one who changed, by the way, the Hajj. He changed the Talbiyah. He's the one who introduced many different pagan customs, which the Quran references. مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ مِن بَحِيرَةٍ وَلَا سَائِبَةٍ وَلَا وَصِيلَةٍ وَلَا حَامٍ. All of these are pagan customs that Amr ibn Luhay introduced. Our Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith in Sahih Muslim that I saw Amr ibn Luhay dragging his intestines in the fire of hell, dragging behind him. He was the first person to introduce idolatry into the haram. He was the first person to change the religion of Ibraheem Alehissalaam. Of the major occurrences, so the tribe of Khuza'a are not the Quraysh. They're still not the Quraysh. So the Quraysh are not yet in charge of Mecca still. What happens, how did the Quraysh get in charge of Mecca again? So the Quraysh have not been in charge of Mecca since the time of the pre-Jurhumites, right? Meaning that Bani Ismail. They have not been in charge of Mecca, but they have been living around Mecca. For all of this time, they have basically been in the vicinity. The Prophet ﷺ's great grandfather, Qusay ibn Kilab, he was the one who managed to basically re-enter Mecca, not reconquer. Why? Because the story says that he married the chieftain, he married the daughter of the chieftain of Khuza'a. So the chieftain of Khuza'a, he had a daughter, and Qusay married that daughter. And when the chieftain died, Qusay is the powerful son-in-law. Perhaps he didn't have sons, we don't know. But basically he takes charge of the people of Mecca. There was a war as well between Khuza'a and Quraysh, or Qusay we can say, and Qusay won over them, that I am going to be your chieftain. And so from Qusay ibn Kilab, and roughly Qusay ibn Kilab is around 450 CE, around 450 CE. So before the Prophet by around 150 years, Qusay ibn Kilab takes charge of the Kaaba, and the Quraysh remain there in charge until the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is the beginning, if you like. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is setting the stage for the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the Prophet's great grandfather, right? Everybody should memorize the nasab of the Prophet. Every one of you should know his genealogy at least until Qusay. So let's do it all together. Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim ibn Abd Manaf ibn Qusay ibn Kilab ibn Murrah. Okay? So once again, this is, you should all know this is basic genealogy, right? Basic genealogy. We're not even asking to go back to Adnan or something, but just basically. Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, everybody should know this, right? Abdul Muttalib's father is the Hashim, Banu Hashim, Hashemites, right? The Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, Hashim. So Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim, right? And then Hashim is the son of Abd Manaf, and Abd Manaf is the son of this guy Qusay. Okay, so Qusay is the one who reintroduces Quraysh into the Haram, and his great grandson Hashim, so this is now the Banu Hashemites, Hashim is the one who then made Mecca a political and an economic capital by doing what? Rihlat al-Shita'i wal-Sayf. Rihlat al-Shita'i wal-Sayf is Hashim, right? So the Prophet's great grandfather, The Prophet's great-grandfather, Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim. So Hashim is the one who then makes Mecca the economic capital. It's a brilliant idea and scheme. We talked about this way back in the day, that by having these two Rihlat al-Shita'i wal-Sayf, one to Yemen and the other to Syria, he's basically linking Mecca to the international trade routes. From Yemen, there's Abyssinian Africa. All of Africa and all of India are linked through Yemen. And then from Syria, you have the entire Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire. Right? And so this is a beautiful, ingenious scheme that now makes Mecca a source of wealth. It makes Mecca a source of dominion, a source of political and economic strength. And all of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is laying the foundation for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to come. And before the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in terms of external politics, we already said that there were two major powers, the Byzantine Empire, or to be more precise, the Eastern Byzantine Empire, and this is basically the remnants of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire split into two. You have the Western and the Eastern. This is the Eastern Byzantine that we're interested in. The Western is, of course, Europe, and Europe did not deal with the Prophet ﷺ. That's not relevant to our Seerah. Europe only comes into the picture at the Crusades. That's the first encounter of Europe with Islam, is the Crusades. That's going to happen another 1,000 years later. And the time of the Prophet, up until the Crusades, it was only Eastern Europe, which is the Eastern Byzantine Empire. And then, of course, on the other side, you have the Persians, the Sassanid kingdom, and the other principalities in India and China did not play any role in the Seerah. Arabia, we said, was perfect politically and geographically for many reasons. Arabia was perfect for many reasons. First and foremost, it was smack in the middle between the two superpowers. So geographically, if you're going to interact with both of them, you don't want to be on one side. You don't want to, it's smack in the middle. So it's perfect. In terms of history, Arabia does not have any colonialist history. It does not have any major negative wars with either of the two. So it has been neutral. There are some Arabs that have treaties with the Persians. There are some Arabs that have treaties with the Byzantines. So the Arabs as a whole have been neutral. Also, the Arabs have never been a unified force. So the first person to unify them will become a national force, an international force. And our Prophet was the first person to unify all of the Arabs. Before the coming of the Prophet, the Arabs had never been united. So it is as if there is, what's a good word here, hidden talent, or latent, if you like, power. Latent power. That power is there, but it hasn't been kindled yet. All of the Arabs are there, but they haven't been united yet. If they are united, they can become a force. They have not been united because they're in paganism. They're in Jahiliyyah. There is no unified government. And so Allah Azza wa Jal is willing for our Prophet to bring a new religion, a new system, a new entire way of life, so that the Arabs will now become an international power. Also, religiously, the Arabs are neither Christians nor Zoroastrians. So the Arabs are now a third party as well. So economically and politically they're neutral. Religiously they're also neutral. This is absolutely perfect now. Religiously they are pagans. They will become Muslims. So a new religion will come, and this will be the uniting force for them all. And the Arabs themselves had certain characteristics that made them better suited for this endeavor. Of them is the harshness of their livelihood. Both the Sassanids and the Byzantines are now spoiled. They're living in the height of luxury. And the Arabs have a very difficult existence. And they are used to the arts of war. And our Prophet ﷺ needed such warriors, such people that could live difficult lives and march hundreds and thousands of miles in the desert heat. The conquest of Persia, how did it occur? From Medina, they went all the way to what is now outside of Tehran. How did they conquer all of this? They had the skills. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had chosen them to do this. We also mentioned that the Jahiliyyah Arabs had divided themselves even religiously. Once idolatry spread, then, as is the case with idolatry, people became partisan to their own gods. Hubal and Manat and Allat, and they say that the Quran mentions this, the 5 gods of the time of Nuh were resurrected. Literally those, the most ancient gods of shirk were then resurrected by the Arabs. And they are Wad and Suwa and Yaghuth and Ya'uq and Nasr. These 5 gods were resurrected, and they were given each one to one of the tribes, and they began fighting for wealth, for power, for religion, for every single reason. Before the birth of the Prophet, by probably around 50 years or 60 years, the major occurrences that took place to lay the foundation for his coming took place in the reign of Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib, what was his real name? Who can remind me? Shaybat al-Hamd. Shaybat al-Hamd. Abdul Muttalib was the one who was the final precursor to bring about the glory of the Quraysh. So we've already said the Quraysh are slowly getting back into the realm of things, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is willing that the Quraysh becomes that power that is going to be. So three things happen in the reign of Abdul Muttalib that caused the majd, or the glory of the Quraysh, to return. The first, which is the most important for survival, the rediscovery of Zemzem. And it is unimaginable for us how the Quraysh would have lived for so many hundreds of years in that desert environment, struggling for water, until finally Abdul Muttalib, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him through the dreams to rediscover the well of Zemzem. And this brought about, for the first time, a continuous supply of water since the times of the tribe of Jurhum. So for over 200 years, 250 years, they had eked out an existence from the wells, from bringing in rainwater, until finally that well is rediscovered. The second incident is the incident of the sacrificing of, or the vow to sacrifice Abdullah. And this was the precursor to singling out Abdullah to be such a great, such a noble person, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him, and before him Allah chose Ismail. The both of them are called those whom Allah Azza wa Jal saved from sacrifice, right? The both of them, Allah substituted animals and rams to save them from sacrifice, and our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is the son of the both of them, Abdullah and Ismail, and the both of them were substituted and saved by Allah's direct intervention. And the final story of Abdul Muttalib is of course أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ, the story of the attack of Abraha on the Kaaba, and how Abdul Muttalib managed to basically pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was as his hands, not that he did anything, but it was during his reign. And the miracle was clear for everybody, and all of this was to honor the coming of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that each one of his ancestors before him was such an honorable person, was such a great and majestic person, that when the Prophet ﷺ came, he has already established a stellar credential in a society where the pedigree, or if you like, the lineage is honored more than anything else. And our Prophet ﷺ had such a lineage that it was impossible for any other person to rival that. Because as we know, Abdullah only had the Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah and Amina, they were only married for, literally it is said, for a week or so. Literally, that Abdullah and Amina were only together for, some say, even 3 days. Some say a week, and then Abdullah went on a journey and he never came back, and Amina became pregnant from that short, brief marriage. Our Prophet ﷺ said, hadith is in Sahih Muslim, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اصْطَفَى كِنَانَةَ مِنْ وَلَدِ إِسْمَاعِيلِ. Allah chose Kinana from all of the children of Ismail. So Kinana is maybe 6 or 7 generations down. So the Prophet is saying Kinana, Allah chose him from the children of Ismail. وَاصْطَفَى قُرَيْشًا مِنْ Kinana. And from Kinana he chose Quraysh. So a few generations down there is Quraysh. Who is Quraysh? There's a lot of controversy. Some say he is Fihr ibn Ghalib, and some say he's other names, but one most common opinion is that he is Fihr. He is Fihr ibn Ghalib. That is Quraysh. And so he chose Quraysh from the children of Kinana. And وَاصْطَفَى مِنْ قُرَيْشٍ Hashim. From the Quraysh he chose Hashim. وَاصْطَفَانِي مِنْ Bani Hashim. And from the children of Hashim he chose me. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, out of my forefathers, each one of these forefathers is the most honorable, is the most chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the point being here, as we said, that had the Prophet ﷺ not had this high level of lineage, he would not have managed to survive in the hostile climate of Mecca. It was his lineage that Allah used to protect him. It was the fact that he was the grandson of Abdul Muttalib, the great grandson of Hashim, that he was direct descendant of all of these people, that he is the most noble man, and to harm him would have brought the greatest humiliation on themselves, because he is their prize. He is their greatest person in the whole tribe, how could they possibly harm him? And this was the way their Jahili mind worked, and Allah Azza wa Jal used it against them for the advantage of Islam. It is also narrated that when Amina gave birth, the Prophet ﷺ said that my mother saw a light proceeding from her that basically shone upon the palaces in Asham, the palaces in Syria. And there's a number of connotations here. Of them, Syria was the bastion of civilization at that time, and it was the first of the greatest lands conquered by the Muslims. It is as if this child will now become the owner or the leader or conquer the greatest civilization to make his civilization the greatest civilization. And that is exactly what happened. And in one authentic hadith in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَنَا دَعْوَةُ أَبِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَبُشْرَى عِيسَى بْنِ مَرْيَمَ. I am the da'wah of my father Ibrahim. The dua. I am the dua of Ibrahim. And I am the bushra, or the glad tidings of Isa ibn Maryam. By the way, the word Injil means glad tidings. The word Injil means glad tidings, from the Greek evangelion, which is to give glad tidings. And therefore his book was called that which is giving glad tidings. And our Prophet ﷺ said, I am that glad tidings. I am the bushra. I am the good news. Even in the Old Testament, the New Testament, still Jesus Christ is quoted as saying that good news, I'm coming with the good news. This is the good news. We have it over here. That the Prophet is saying, Ana bushra Isa. I am the good news that Isa is promising. And our Prophet ﷺ was born, as we know, in the year of the elephant. As for the date of his birth, I quoted 13 opinions, if you remember, and we said that indeed Allah knows best. But if any date is the closest to the truth, is probably the 8th of Rabi'ul Awwal, and I went over the various dates at that point in time. The Prophet ﷺ was raised by the Banu Sa'ad ibn Bakr. And the Banu Sa'ad ibn Bakr was one of the tribes that were Bedouin tribes that used to visit Mecca to take care of children, to take care of babies. And the Arabs would do this, in particular the Quraysh would do this, so that the children could be raised in a healthier environment, away from the plagues and diseases of the city, to build their stamina, to fortify them, and to make them fluent in Arabic, because they considered the Arabs of the Bedouins to be, the Arabic of the Bedouins to be the most fluent Arabic, and they wanted their children, this was their education, if you like, to be raised over there. And every few months the child would come back, visit the parents for a few months, and then go back. This is how they did it. And so it was at this point in time, when the Prophet ﷺ was with Halima, that his incident of Shaqqus Sadr took place. And that is, of course, the opening of the heart when he was 4 years old, and the washing of the heart with Zemzem, Jibreel coming and washing his heart and taking out any satanic influence. That black dot was the influence of shaitan. It was thrown away. When this happened, Halima became scared and worried, and she returned the boy to Amina, and Amina passes away, and Abdul Muttalib passes away, and our Prophet ﷺ is orphaned 3 times over. His father, and then his mother, and then his grandfather Abdul Muttalib. And all of this is done so that no one can claim any favor upon the Prophet ﷺ, so that Allah Azza wa Jal can directly take charge of this orphan, so that this orphan can learn the harshness of life, because he's going to face a lot more harshness now. Orphans, they learn to be mature very fast. The most mature child is an orphan child, because you have to stand on your own feet, right? The one who's an orphan, he's not going to be spoiled. He's not going to be pampered. He's going to live a rough existence, and he'll be very mature very fast. And our Prophet ﷺ needed to be the most mature of mankind. So he is thrice orphaned, once after another. And the orphans as well, along with being mature, they also understand the difficulties of life. They've gone through the most difficult life themselves, and this makes them soft-hearted, not hard-hearted, because they know what it means to be an orphan. So they makes them the most gentle. And all of these qualities our Prophet ﷺ had to have, so he was tested in this manner from the very beginning. In his early life, we don't know of much. As I have said many times, this era of the Seerah is the least documented, because who is there to tell us what happened? These years of him growing up, the teenage years, the young manhood years, we literally have 2 or 3 small incidents that we can roughly piece together. Of the most interesting of them is Hilf al-Fudul, and that is, of course, the treaty that our Prophet ﷺ enacted along with the other senior members of the Quraysh to stand up for truth, to speak out against oppression, to help the weak against the strong, to help those who have been wronged against the wrongdoers, even if the wrongdoers are from Quraysh and the ones who have been wronged are from low tribes. That's not going to happen anymore. So the Prophet ﷺ was proud to have participated in Hilf al-Fudul, and he was probably around 22 years old at the time, and he was the youngest participant, and this shows us he has a bright future ahead. And he was proud to tell us that he worked as a shepherd, the most menial of jobs. And he told us many years later that I used to work as a shepherd for qararit. Qararit is like rocks, coins, like coins that are made out of rocks, not even coins that are made out of silver or something. Qararit is what we will call pennies, like the cheapest currency, right? I used to work for qararit, for the people of Mecca, as a shepherd, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to cause him to go through this difficult time for many reasons as well. Of them is that the shepherd learns to be patient, because you have to shepherd a flock of sheep. You're going to have to shepherd entire civilization. Of them is that the shepherd learns that every sheep has a certain quality and characteristic. You need to deal with that sheep in that manner in order to get it to do what you want. And similarly, the leader has to learn that every single person has qualities that you need to learn to deal with those qualities if you want to be a true leader. The mark of a true leader is that he or she can deal with every single member of society in a manner that is conducive to that person. Those who have a short fuse, those who don't know how to deal with every single segment, they can never be a leader. The leader understands this, and that is the stepping stone. The shepherd also learns how to do this, and so this is the stepping stone to becoming a leader for any group. And of course, it is through his job as a shepherd that the wealthy lady Khadijah, who was, it is said, the wealthiest and the most sought after lady, but she had been married twice, and apparently she was not interested in any other man for the time being, until she saw our Prophet ﷺ. She saw his shyness, she saw his honesty, she saw his qualities, and therefore she was the one who instigated an indirect proposal that eventually ended up in a marriage. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him with the greatest woman who supported him, who helped him, who financially, from being a shepherd, now he became instantaneously a businessman. The highest upgrade possible at the time. The lowest job is a shepherd, and the most richest job to this day is always, the most money is always in the business, right? And so our Prophet instantaneously upgraded from a shepherd all the way to being a businessman for Khadijah. All of this because of his honesty, because of his sincerity, because of his good qualities and shyness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala simply opened up the doors with this one marriage to change his entire livelihood now. There was no worry about it anymore. And he was living a very difficult life in the house of Abu Talib, and the next day he wakes up in his own house, the house of Khadijah, in a wealthy house, and he is now the one who is in charge of this money. And for the rest of his Meccan period, there is no problem, if you like, for finances. And it is at this time that Zayd is gifted to him, the young boy Zayd, and eventually Zayd ibn Haritha at the time, eventually he adopts Zayd probably when he's in his early 30s, when the Prophet is in his early 30s, and Zayd is probably around a teenager at the time, where the story of his father, Zayd's father, comes, and Zayd chooses the Prophet over his father. So to make his father happy and to show him how much he loves Zayd, the Prophet says, "This is now my son, Zayd ibn Muhammad." And of course Allah Azza wa Jalla later abrogated that in the 5th year of the Hijrah. So for over 20 years Zayd ibn Muhammad was known as Zayd ibn Muhammad, for over 20 years. So much so Ibn Abbas said, we never knew that Zayd ibn Muhammad was Zayd ibn Haritha until Allah revealed Surah Al-Ahzab. We never knew that the love, the relationship, it was unknown. Ibn Abbas is a young kid. He said, I didn't know that Zayd ibn Haritha was Zayd ibn Muhammad was Zayd ibn Haritha until Allah revealed Surah Al-Ahzab, and that's in the 5th year of the Hijrah. And the final incident that takes place before the beginning of the Wahy is the rebuilding of the Kaaba. The rebuilding of the Kaaba. And the rebuilding of the Kaaba took place when the Prophet ﷺ was around 35 years old, and we already mentioned a number of interesting details about the building of the Kaaba. Of them is that the Emperor of Rome had sent a special ship full of very expensive timber and teak wood that was meant for a very fancy church in Abyssinia. That he wanted to build the greatest church in Abyssinia. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed otherwise, that the ship went into a storm and it shipwrecked in Jeddah, the city of Jeddah. And the merchants had no money to get back to Rome. They were forced to sell all of this expensive timber and teak and all of this basically straight from the palace of the emperor, and it was meant for the greatest church in the Arabian Peninsula. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is demonstrating that no longer are we going to worship in these places. There's going to be a better house built, and that is the house of Ibraheem Alehissalaam. And so this teak, this expensive wood is purchased right at the time the Kaaba had been demolished by a flood. The Quraysh gather their money, they go to Jeddah and they purchase this expensive wood, and the wood is so beautiful quality that they have to build a Kaaba out of it, but it's not enough wood for the Kaaba. So what do? They shorten the Kaaba for the first time in its history, but Allah has a wisdom here as well. The Kaaba was a rectangle, they make it into somewhat of a square, and to this day, from that day up until this day, the Kaaba has remained a square, and a portion of it has remained open, so that all of us can walk right there and pray as if we are praying inside the Kaaba, without having to worry about getting in and out. And so they rebuilt the Kaaba, and our Prophet ﷺ symbolically, he unifies all of them. He stops that civil war between the two sub-tribes of the Quraysh, when he is chosen to with his own hands to put the black stone. This is very symbolic, because the black stone is from Jannah, because the black stone is the only piece that is from the original piece of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So our Prophet ﷺ, he's taking that original piece and he is putting it where it belongs. So it is as if there is a precursor, that the religion of Ibrahim will now also be put back in its right place, just like I am putting this in its right place. And also there is this precursor that just like he has unified all of the Quraysh and stopped the civil war, he will also unify all of the Arabs for greater goods as well. And in the 13th year before the Hijrah, roughly 600 CE, roughly around 600 CE, 598 to 599, 600 CE, this is when the wahi comes down. This is when Iqra is revealed, when our Prophet ﷺ, having all of his needs met now, he doesn't need to go on business, he doesn't need anything. Now he is 40 years old and he is feeling somewhat restless, he's feeling there's something missing in his life and he doesn't know what it is. So he's contemplating and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Ghar Hira. And that is when the incident of Jibreel happens. Jibreel comes down and reveals Iqra to him, as we know. And Khadijah comforts him, and Khadijah tells him that what he has seen has to be the truth, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never humiliate him. It has been said that Khadijah believed in him even before he believed in himself, and there is an element of truth in that. And that also shows us the iman of this lady Khadijah, and it also shows us the importance of a loving wife, the importance of a inspiring wife in the life of a man. Our Prophet ﷺ was calmed down by Khadijah, Zammiluni, Dathiruni, and she believed in him and affirmed him even before he himself knew what was happening. And after this, the wahi opens up, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals. After Iqra was the next revelation. Who can remind me? Ya ayyuhal muddathir. مدثر يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك وطاهر والرجز فاهجر ولا تمنن تستكثر ربك فاصبر. We went over the tafsir of all of these ayat in a khutbah, and also very briefly in the seerah, but in a khutbah I went over all of this. And I remember I said, for those who remember, Iqra is all about one word, what? Knowledge, ilm. And Muddathir is all about amal. Right? Iqra is about ilm, and Muddathir is about amal. And ilm and amal put together is what makes Islam. Right? So in Iqra, basically he is told, you have to learn, you have to research, you have to study. And in Muddathir he is told, now act upon what you know. Now act upon what you know. And so the Prophet ﷺ begins announcing privately to those whom he thinks will accept this new message. He begins preaching to various people. And he does not, we mentioned before, it is incorrect to say it was secret da'wah. It's not secret. Rather, the better term to use is it's private da'wah. It's private da'wah. Private da'wah, he goes to those whom he feels will accept the message. And the first converts were Khadijah and Waraqa ibn Nawfal. These were the first two converts. And after them, Ali ibn Abi Talib and Zayd ibn Haritha, these are members of the household. Right? So they all convert within the household. And the first person outside the household to convert is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the first person who is given da'wah. And our Prophet ﷺ said, there is none amongst you, meaning amongst the adult males, there is none amongst you, except that when I first approached him, he was hesitant, except for Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. The only one who, without hesitation, immediately accepted was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and that was the first adult convert based on da'wah. All of these conditions apply. Waraqa, technically da'wah was not given to him, rather it was asked of him, and he accepted, once again without being invited. You understand the point here, right? That the Prophet is going to him asking what is happening, and Waraqa accepts without having been invited formally, right? Khadijah as well is the same. And Ali was not yet baligh, so he is also an early convert. He's the first young convert, if you like. The first actual convert of the adults males really is Abu Bakr in that sense. Other early converts are Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas and Uthman ibn Affan and Zubayr ibn al-Awwam and Abdurrahman ibn Auf and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. These are the early converts. Every one of us should know the names of some or all of these early converts. And then after them, a group of Mawali, a group of non-Arabs, typically slaves, were the next batch of converts. And these are of course the famous Bilal ibn Abi Rabah, Khabbab ibn al-Arat, Yasir and Sumayya and their son Ammar, and all of the other early Mawali. And the early da'wah has been divided into a number of stages. In fact, the entire da'wah, we can divide the entire 23 years into 5 stages of how to give da'wah. The first of these stages is private da'wah, where we don't publicly open up. We don't publicly go and preach. We simply go to those whom we think will be interested. And this lasted probably 2 to 3 years, private da'wah. The second stage is open da'wah with the tongue. And this lasted 10 years. This lasted 10 years. And the last 3 of those 10 years, it was open da'wah to the whole Arabian Peninsula. So we can say the first 3 years secret da'wah, private. The next 7 years, da'wah to the people of Mecca only. Then the final 3 years, da'wah to anybody who's willing to listen. So the process began smallest and then worked his way outward, right? So he began with his own friends and family whom he thought would be interested. Then he moved on to his family, which is Mecca. Then he moved on to all of Arabian Peninsula. That was in the final 3 years of Mecca. Then when he immigrated to Medina, the third stage of da'wah can be that there's da'wah along with defensive war, if you like, physical confrontation, but only against those who are harmful to you. And this is represented in the early years of Medina. Badr and Uhud, all of this, and even Ahzab. This is against the Quraysh and the Muslims. That's it, right? Ahzab, there are other people that the Quraysh bring in. And after Ahzab, then you have another stage. And that is the stage of open da'wah to all without any physical war. And this took place with the Treaty of Hudaibiya. The Treaty of Hudaibiya, all wars come to an end. There's just going to be peace in the whole land. And this is another phase of da'wah that the Prophet went through. And then the final phase, which is after the conquest of Mecca, and this lasted only a year and a half, and that is the open da'wah along with defensive and offensive jihad. And our Prophet passed away in this phase, and this shows us that all 5 of these phases are possible. No one of them abrogates the previous one. Rather, all 5 of these are possible, and the Muslim Ummah or the Muslim leadership will choose which one of these phases that is the most politically permissible or conducive to the lands and the times and the place that we live in. So we said after 3 years, the Prophet ﷺ opened up his da'wah and he began publicly preaching to everybody in Mecca. And this is the famous verse in Surah Ash-Shu'ara, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, warn your closest relatives. And this was when the Prophet ﷺ invited his closest relatives to his house, Abu Talib's house, and he then publicly announced that he is a prophet. And we have already said that the people of Mecca had already heard the whispers, but they've never been approached directly, so they cannot do anything. And when he tells them to their faces for the first time, this was when Abu Talib finally manages to express his irritation, and he stands up and he throws his hands in the air and he says, you've basically wasted my time. That's why you invited me to tell us about this ludicrous thing. Tabban lak. Right? So basically, may you be cursed. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed at this, Tabbat yada Abi Lahabin wa tabba. Did I say Abu Talib? I'm Abu Lahab, sorry. Did I say Abu Talib? No, I'm Abu Lahab. So Abu Lahab is the one who said at the house of Abu Talib. Sorry. So Abu Lahab, of course, says this, and then at the house of Abu Talib, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals Surah Tabbat Yada Abi Lahabin wa Tab. And from that point onwards, for the next 5 or 6 years, a number of incidents happen, or we can categorize all that happens into a number of categories in terms of tactics that the Quraysh used to oppose the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The first of these tactics is to try to use political means or emotional means to stop him. And the political means, you go to Abu Talib. Abu Talib is the chieftain, Abu Talib is his chieftain, Abu Talib is his uncle. And so they put pressure on Abu Talib. First gentle pressure and then strict pressure. So much so that they threatened to boycott him initially. They didn't do this initially, but they threatened to boycott him. And this was when Abu Talib approached the Prophet ﷺ once, and the Prophet ﷺ refused. He approached him much more harshly and strictly, that I need you to stop doing this. And that was when the Prophet ﷺ said that if they were to do this and that, if they were to give me the power over the sun and the moon, then I would still not give up this message until I die in its cause. And that was when Abu Talib said, when he saw that determination, he said that no matter what they say to me after this, I will never approach you. No matter what they say to me after this, I will never approach you to stop you. And so Abu Talib never interfered. He lived up to his word. He never once interfered with the da'wah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When this didn't work, the next tactic they used was to ridicule the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the believers. Open mockery, sarcasm. They accused him of being madman, they accused him of being a magician, they accused him of being possessed, sahir, majnoon, all of this is accused. It is said that Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl in particular would follow the Prophet ﷺ wherever he went, and make sure that anybody who he spoke to, they would go to him and then warn them, this is our nephew, this is our such and such, and he is possessed, he is crazy, do not listen to him. And this obviously, it hurt the Prophet ﷺ immensely, and there are many references to this in the Quran. Another tactic that they used is to ask the Prophet ﷺ for miracles. And the Quran is full of at least a dozen such references, at least a dozen verses. They ask you for this, they ask you for that. They ask you to send a river through Mecca. They ask you for gold. They ask you for Allah to come down. They ask you to see a book coming down just in front of their eyes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not respond to these messages, to these threats, but He did give other miracles. He did give other miracles to them. And there were plenty of miracles even in the Meccan phase. And the most grand of them is the splitting of the moon. Shaqqul Qamar, which is referenced in the Quran, that He showed them the splitting of the moon. And they turned around and they said, He has bewitched our eyes. When this also didn't work, another tactic that they used was attempts of a middle ground, or even bribery. That, why don't you worship your God for one day and then allow us to worship ours for another day, right? We'll try to have some compromise. And Allah reveals Surah Al-Kafirun. Or bribery. And so they tried to bribe him, that we will make you our leader, we'll make you our ruler, we'll give you as much money as you want, we'll cause you to marry whomever you want. Basically, whatever a man can desire, you will get it. But just stop giving this message. And this as well did not work. Another thing that they did was they attempted to trick him. by asking him questions that they thought he could not answer. And they primarily did this by getting questions from the Yahud, because the concept of prophecy was not known to the Arabs. They really did not have a concept of somebody communicating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they knew the Jews believed in this. So they went to them a number of times, and Surah Al-Kahf was revealed because of this, and Surah Isra was revealed because of this. And so the questions were, and Surah Yusuf was revealed because of this, right? All of these surahs came down because of these questions. That the Jews said, go and ask him about the Prophet Joseph. What does he know about Joseph? And so Allah revealed in the Quran all of Surah Yusuf. The Jews said to them, ask him about the Ruh. What is the Ruh? وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. Right? The Yahud said, ask him about Dhul Kifl. Ask him about, Dhul Qarnayn. Dhul Qarnayn. What does he know of Dhul Qarnayn? And so again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed about Dhul Qarnayn. And they kept on asking, and whatever they asked, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to them. And this again shows us the knowledge that he had. And the greatest miracle in this was that the knowledge of these prophets was not known to the Arabs, because the Arabs have no lineage with Joseph. The Arabs have no lineage with Moses, with Dhul Qarnayn. What has this got to do with them? The Arabs had no knowledge of any of these prophets and their stories. And there are no books, as we know, there are no libraries. And Mecca is not a center of civilization. Yet when the Prophet ﷺ is asked about the story of Joseph, and the Quranic story is so similar to the narrative to this day in the Old Testament, that it is amazing. It is amazing how this person in the middle of nowhere, without any access to any book, can basically dictate the entire story. And Allah references in the Quran that you did not know these stories before the Quran came down. And by the way, let me just tell you, within academia, this is one of the biggest challenges, that to this day people try to decipher, where did the Prophet ﷺ get this knowledge from? Of course, we know it came from Allah, but believe me, this is something they have so many attempts and so many theories and so many things to do. I don't want to go into my tangents right now, but one of the weirdest is that when they realize how much information the Quran has, one predominant theory is that the Quran does not date to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It dates to the time of the Umayyads and the Abbasids, because it's too much information for somebody in Mecca to know at the time of the Prophet. You see this point, right? So they say it couldn't have been compiled in 600 CE in Mecca. It must have been compiled 700 CE in Baghdad, in Damascus. And this is a predominant theory, believe it or not. It's so ludicrous, but this is the theory. Why? Because the Quran is full of too much information. It's not possible that an illiterate man from Mecca would have been able to come up with it, right? So again, my point being, the mu'jiza is still the mu'jiza. To this day, they cannot explain that mu'jiza. So they tried to trick him, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered every single question with verses from the Quran. Another tactic they did is outright torture. And because the Prophet ﷺ was who he was, the torture to him only came right at the very end. Right at the very end, the last year or two, that was when it became very difficult for him. Otherwise, before this time, most of the torture was directed towards the non-Arabs, towards the Mawali, those who couldn't have tribes, and people became martyrs in early Islam. The first martyr was Sumayya. She was the first martyr, and then Yasir followed after that, and a number of early martyrs. Bilal was almost martyred. Many of the early Mawali, Khabbab ibn al-Arat was tortured with many things. So all of these stories that we know, this took place again in the middle Meccan phase, not the early Meccan, the middle Meccan phase. And one of the final things that they did is the boycott. And the boycott was enacted against the Banu Hashim, the Muslim of them and the Kafir of them. The entire tribe of Banu Hashim. Why? Because Abu Talib refused to cooperate. So they punished Abu Talib as well. And so the entire tribe of the Banu Hashim, except for Abu Lahab, because they knew Abu Lahab was on their side, he was allowed to stay in Mecca. The entire tribe of Banu Hashim and the Muslims were forced to basically leave Mecca and start living in the desert like their forefathers before had done, without water, without Zemzem, without any access to food and anything. And that was the most difficult time of the Meccan stage, that lasted most likely around 2 years. It lasted And it was a very difficult stage, which sadly we don't have much information about, as I said, but it was a very difficult time. And in the lecture that I gave recently, which is online about Mu'tam ibn Adi, we mentioned about Mu'tam ibn Adi being one of the main people that helped the Muslims in this regard. And he also managed to break the boycott as well. Probably before or immediately after the boycott. Again, one of the problems of the seerah is dates. We don't have dates, especially in the Meccan phase. When did the boycott take place? Again, many theories. But around this time, most likely it was before the boycott. The Prophet ﷺ had given permission for hijrah, immigration, because the torture had become so much that he allows them to immigrate. And around 15 people emigrated. Amongst them was Uthman ibn Affan and the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, Ruqayyah, Uthman ibn Mad'un, Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, Mus'ab ibn Umair, Abu Salama and his wife Salama, and Salama was to later become the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. They all emigrate to Abyssinia, to Habasha, and within 5 months they return. And they returned because, as we said, of the incident that is called in Western sources the Satanic verses. In Western sources it's called the Satanic verses. In Eastern sources it is called Qissatul Gharaniq, or the story of the pelicans. And I mentioned the 3 theories of the Satanic verses, if you remember. And the strongest theory, or the strongest opinion, is that there is no such thing as the Satanic verses. That the Prophet ﷺ recited Surah Al-Najm, and when he reached the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Najm that فَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوا, do sajda and worship Allah. And the surah was so powerful that everybody, Muslim and Kafir, jinn and ins, all did sajda around the Kaaba. It was just so powerful. It was one of those occasions that the people of Mecca are enthralled listening to the Prophet recite the Quran. They're mesmerized and they're moved. And when he finishes the surah, and I recited the surah, and I ask you to listen to the recitation by famous Qurra, Husari or Mashawi or somebody, it's one of the most powerful Makki surahs, and it is one of my favorite surahs. It's such a powerful surah in the Quran that you don't need any satanic verses to explain what happened. And there is no authentic narration of the satanic verses. Rather, the authentic narration simply says, Bukhari simply says, when he finished Surah Al-Najm, everybody prostrated. And it makes complete sense. When everybody prostrated, this story, when it reached Abyssinia, was everybody accepted Islam. Right? So, small story, when it gets to Abyssinia, it's now become a big story. And the people in Abyssinia were finding it difficult, obviously, in every sense, monetarily, language barrier, cultural barrier. It's a very different time and place to move. City and country is very difficult. And honestly, in our times, I don't even think we can understand how difficult that must have been for them to do. So they're homesick, they're any type of story, they jump on it, they come all the way back, only to discover, lo and behold, no, situation is still the same. But Allah had something planned. And that was, these people tell the others that, okay, look, it's difficult culturally, but politically it's free. And faced between cultural difficulty and political difficulty, everybody will choose cultural. It's easier to live a free life with cultural difficulty than to live a culturally same life, but your life is under threat and pressure, right? So with this news, almost 100 people emigrated to Abyssinia. And this was a big blow. It's demoralizing for the Quraysh. Why? Because it's hurting their prestige. Their own people are leaving them. And by the way, 100 is a big number. For Quraysh, it's a very big number. We're talking about small cities at the time, right? 100 probably represents maybe less than 10% of their population. This is a big percentage. It's not something as if, 100 is a trivial amount for them. So a good percentage of them simply leave and go to Abyssinia. This is hurting their prestige. What do? They send 2 emissaries to bribe, to negotiate. The 2 emissaries are rebuffed and returned with their gifts. And to make matters worse, 2 of their most elite members convert to the faith. 2 of their most elite members convert to the faith. The first of them is Hamza, and the second of them is Umar ibn al-Khattab. They both convert within a few weeks from each other. And this is now the beginning of the tide shifting. That things are about to change, and it's very clear that the beginning of the tide is happening. And the boycott is difficult to date, but around this time somewhere the boycott occurs. The boycott is one of those things, Allah, it's very difficult. Did it occur in the 4th year of the da'wah, or the 7th year of the da'wah, or the 9th? It's very difficult to date when did the boycott occur. Somewhere around this time the boycott occurs, and most likely, in my humble opinion, the boycott is one of the last thing that occurs for one simple reason. It's such a drastic tactic that they couldn't have done this early on. To cut off one of your own is the worst thing that the Jahili Arabs can do. To boycott one of your own is one of the worst things the Jahili Arabs can do. So the very fact that they are now boycotting one of their own shows us that this is one of the last tactics that they did. So Allah knows best, but the boycott probably took place 7th, 8th year of the da'wah, i.e. 4 or 5 years before the hijrah, right? So past the midpoint, and then 7th, 8th year of the da'wah, the boycott takes place. Then the Prophet ﷺ comes back, and within a few months of him coming back, two very severe tragedies take place. The first of them is the death of Abu Talib. According to Ibn Ishaq, Abu Talib died the same month of the boycott when they returned. And it is not too far-fetched to assume that the rigorous hardship of the boycott made him suffer his health, deteriorate his health so bad that it basically was an immediate cause of his death. And that is not too far-fetched to say. So the very month that they return, Abu Talib dies, and this has been dated to be the Shawwal of the 10th year of the Hijrah. The Shawwal of the 10th year of the Da'wah, 10th year of the Da'wah, i.e. 3 BH, 3 before Hijrah, right? You all understand? 10th year of the Da'wah, and 3 years before the Hijrah, because before the Hijrah is 13 years. And quick quiz question. How many uncles of the Prophet ﷺ lived to see Islam? And how many of them accepted, and how many of them rejected? How many uncles did he have? He had probably 12 uncles. Maybe 11. Probably 11. He definitely had more than 10. This is a common misconception. Abdullah was the 10th, but Abbas was younger than Abdullah. Abbas was the same age as the Prophet ﷺ, right? So a lot of people think that he only had 10. This is a mistake. Abdullah was the 10th, meaning when the 10th was born, then Abdul Muttalib did his vow. But he had more sons after, right? So he had at least 12 uncles. How many of them witnessed Islam? Witnessed Islam, not converted.
4. All of them. What, 5?
All 12 of them. So we have 4, we have 2.
At least 4.
All 12? Who's saying all 12? 8. We have only references to 4. If there are more than 4, we don't know. And it is not, most likely these were the only 4, because otherwise we would have had references to them, right? So by the time the Prophet is 40 years old, all of his uncles have died except for 4, which is not too far-fetched, because again, Abdul Muttalib lived a long life too. He's an old man when he died. So when the Prophet is 40, his sons, most of them already died. This is not too far-fetched. And these 4 are, of course, who are they? Abu Lahab and Abu Talib, and Hamza and Abbas. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. Talib. And by the way, Abu Lahab, his name was Abdul Uzza, and Abu Talib, his name was Abd Manaf. And it is perhaps just a coincidence, but both of those were named after idols and they did not accept Islam. Perhaps just a coincidence. And Hamza and Abbas, they are both names of lions, it is said, and they were named. They are both named a positive name, and they both accepted Islam. By the way, as for his aunts, he had 6 aunts, ammat, 6 ammat, and how many of them saw Islam? 1. How many of them saw Islam? At least two. At least two. But when it comes to the aunts, there's a big controversy. How many saw Islam? But for sure, at least two. Who's the second? Battle of Badr. The dream. Atiqah. The dream. Whether Atiqah embraced Islam or not, there's a controversy. Maybe she didn't because there's no reference to her. But of course, Safiya is the one who embraced Islam. Safiya is the one who embraced Islam. So we said that in Shawwal of the 10th year, Abu Talib dies, and less than 6 weeks after the death of Abu Talib, this is followed by the death of Khadijah. And it is said that Khadijah died in Ramadan of the 10th year. So Shawwal and then Ramadan. And this is why this year is called Am al-Huzn, the year of sorrow. Because both of these were the two most closest people to the Prophet ﷺ. That the one of them was his public supporter and the other was his private supporter. And especially the death of Khadijah affected him personally. The death of Abu Talib affected him politically. Right? So in both cases, the loss of close loved ones, and one after the other, they both died. And so much so that it is said that the Prophet ﷺ was not seen smiling for more than a year after the death of Khadijah. He was not seen smiling for the longest time. And it was then that the Sahaba basically forced him that he has to get married, and that is when he married Sauda. That is when he married Sauda. After the death of Khadijah, by a year and a half almost, he married Sauda. And it was after the death of Abu Talib that Abu Lahab was made the chieftain. And ironically, and not a well-known incident or story, initially Abu Lahab changed track. We mentioned this. That initially when he became responsible for the Banu Hashim, he actually softened up. And he realized that, you know what, for better or for worse, this is my responsibility now, and I cannot cut off from my nephew. And so he, in memory, not that he loved him, but it was basically Abu Talib's memory, right? That in memory of Abu Talib, I'm going to continue Abu Talib's policies. But there was an instigator. There was an instigator there, and the instigator basically came to Abu Lahab and quizzed him that, do you know what your nephew says about your own father? How can you support him when he has a position about your own father that is not favorable? So Abu Lahab went to the Prophet and said, what do you say about Abdul Muttalib? What do you say? And the Prophet ﷺ gave a generic response. He said, Huwa ma'a qawmihi, he's with his people. He didn't say anything that is too crude, but the point is given, because our Prophet ﷺ will not lie. He's not going to lie. And he simply said he is with his people. And when Abu Lahab heard this, he basically snapped. And he said, you expect me to support you when this is what you say about my father, your own grandfather? That no, this is not going to happen, basically. And he then returned to the same stance that he had. So it's a gray area now. What exactly is the status of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca now that the chieftain has basically withdrawn the support, right? This is a gray area, and this is why the Prophet ﷺ went to Ta'if. This was the catalyst that caused him to go to Ta'if. That now that in Mecca he doesn't really have support to live, where Abu Lahab has now basically withdrawn. And it's gray area. What does it mean withdrawn? What do you expect me to do now? Again, it's a gray area. So he didn't want to test him. There is no more Khadijah. There is no more his uncle Abu Talib. So then he goes to Ta'if with Zayd. And what happens in Ta'if happens. And many, many years later, when Aisha asked him, what was the worst day of your life? Was it Uhud? He said, no. The worst day of my life was Ta'if. So it was the most difficult day of my life. And so what happens to him happens there. And he then returns from Ta'if bloodied and bruised. And he makes that beautiful dua in the middle of nowhere. He makes that dua. And right then and there, the miracles begin to come upon him. Right then and there, even though the people of Ta'if have rejected him, that Iraqi Christian, Adi, accepts Islam right then and there. Right? And when he stands in tahajjud that night, a group of jinn accept Islam. So it is as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him that don't worry, if your local people have rejected you, the people from every portion of the land will accept you, even the jinn will accept you. Right? And it is no doubt, it is meant for him to be consoled that person from the farthest regions of the world, where Iraq at that time was literally the farthest Arab land of the time, not even Arab at the time, one of the farthest lands, and Adi accepts Islam, and then the jinn embrace Islam as well. And then outside of Mecca, Zayd says to the Prophet, how are you going to re-enter Mecca now? Basically, we don't have that visa to re-enter Mecca. What are we going to do? So the Prophet says, Allah will help us and Allah will find a way out for His messenger. And he sends messages to Abu Sufyan. He sends messages to Suhail ibn Amr. He sends messages to various people. Every one of them gives some excuse. I can't help you, sorry. Not me, I'm not powerful, this and that. Everyone gives an excuse. And then he sends it to who? Mut'im ibn Adi. Mut'im ibn Adi. I gave a whole lecture about Mut'im. It's online, you should see. Recently I gave it. I didn't give it here. I did not give it here, but it's online. Mut'im ibn Adi. One of the most fascinating figures in the Seerah. And this is one of those things that he did. Probably the greatest act that Mut'im did is he single-handedly, and Mut'im is a senior. He's basically to the level of Abu Talib and Abu Lahab. He knows he's the chieftain of the Banu Nawfal, which is one of the sub-tribes of Quraysh. And he sends his own sons outside of Mecca. And they escort the Prophet ﷺ into Mecca. And it's middle of the night, he's literally outside. He sleeps in his own house. In the morning, he tells his sons to arm up. Wear your armor. He has 7 sons. All of them dress up, armed. And they then walk in front of the Kaaba. They do tawaf. And everybody's astonished to see the Prophet back in Mecca. He left, how can he be back here? And then when they finish the tawaf, Mut'im says that, O people of Mecca, I have adopted, or I have given my aman to Muhammad ﷺ, right? And this is blatant slap on the face of who? Abu Jahl? Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab. Blatant, like, this is like, the English phrase, dropping the gauntlet. Like, you are basically saying, and Mut'im hated all of this politics. Even though he's a pagan, even though he's idol worshipper, he's not a Muslim. But he hated all that he had seen from the beginning. He always was truthful to his qualities, to his ideals of keeping one tribe together. These are the ideals of Jahiliyyah. He lived up to them. And the Prophet ﷺ repaid him the honor after the Battle of Badr, as we mentioned, by praising him in a way that his legacy will live on. To this day we praise him, and every one of us, when we think of him, even how he died. But what he did, we have a fondness for that. And we consider him to have done a great benefit. And it is possible that Allah helps His religion through a person who's not a Muslim. There's a hadith like this: Allah helps this religion through a kafir. And Mut'im is one of those whom Allah Azza wa Jalla helped the religion through. So Mut'im then adopts, if you like, or gives aman to the Prophet ﷺ. But the Prophet realized the situation is very precarious, very dangerous. That I'm amongst my own people, but I don't have their protection. And during this time, he has already began reaching out to other tribes. He has approached the tribes that he thinks will convert to Islam and help him. The tribe of Kinda, the tribe of Banu Abdullah ibn Kalb, the tribe of Banu Hanifa, the tribe of Banu Amir ibn Sa'sa', the tribe of Shayban ibn Tha'laba, all of these major tribes. And these were the tribes that, if there was a rival to the Quraysh, it would be these tribes. And our Prophet concentrated on the big names because he wanted some big help. But he gave da'wah to everybody equally. And Allah willed that the help would not come from the big guys. It would come from a small town that he was very familiar with, because his great-grandfather was living there, and he had relatives from his great-grandfather's side, because his great-grandfather's mother was from that tribe. And he had in fact visited it as a child, and his mother had died on the way back. So Allah had willed that there is a blood relationship with Yathrib as well. All of this is willed from the history. Yani Allah Azza wa Jal had willed this, right? That it's not as if this is a stranger. When they come to him and they adopt him and they bring him, they are bringing a relative of theirs. Remember this point as well. when the Ansar, when the people of Yathrib or Medina, when they took him in, there is blood relationship as well from his great grandmother who was from them, right? And so the tribe of the Khazraj from the Yathrib, they come to Mecca, and this is probably the 10th year of the Da'wah. Probably the 10th year of the Da'wah. They come to Mecca, and the Prophet ﷺ gives them Da'wah. They think about it. They say they'll think about it. There were 6 of them, and they go back, and some of them they convert to Islam. So the next year they come back 12. And the Prophet ﷺ officially accepts their Islam. And this is called the first treaty of Aqaba. The year before this is basically the precursor. The da'wah is being given. So the first year is basically da'wah, and this is the 10th year. Then in the 11th year they come, and there are 12 people. And this is the first treaty of Aqaba. And then he sends with them Mus'ab ibn Umair. Mus'ab ibn Umair. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses Mus'ab's da'wah to such an extent that in every single tribe of the people of Yathrib, there are converts. There's not a single tribe except that people have converted. And especially some of the senior up-and-coming leaders. Of course, we are the whole circumstance of Yathrib, Allah had prepared it. Through that civil war, through the wars of, who can remember? The wars of? What are they called? The wars of? Bu'ath. The wars of Bu'ath. That Aus and Khazraj had a civil war that lasted more than 100 years, but especially the previous 5 years. 100 years of tension, and literally it began because a camel grazed into somebody else's land, like how it goes, and this led to one blood, then another blood, then this and that. So 100 years of tension, the last 5 of which was the most severe. And in this, all of the senior leadership had been killed off, except for 2 or 3. Most prominent is Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. Right? These are the only people in their 60s. All of those who are in the senior management positions basically kicked out, killed. So it's only the youngsters left. Fresh, young minds, sick of the old ways, wanting something new. Again, all of this is prepared. As Aisha says, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted the wars of Bu'ath to the Prophet ﷺ before. And this is happening while the Prophet is giving da'wah. It's not relevant to him, but Allah Azza wa Jalla is relevant to His plan. Right? And so the people of Medina now, they are eager for something new. And the da'wah of Mus'ab spreads amongst them like wildfire. And probably more than 150 or 200 have converted. 70 of them come to the Prophet ﷺ in the final few months before the Hijrah. And they then give him the second bay'ah, which is not just a bay'ah of theology, it's not just a bay'ah of iman, it is a bay'ah of politics. That's the difference between the first and the second bay'ah. The first bay'ah, we're Muslims, we'll worship Allah, we're not going to do any major sins. The second bay'ah, all of that, plus if you come to us, we will defend you. We will defend you like we defend our own family. And by the way, this is defensive, not offensive. And in the Battle of Badr, as we mentioned, that was when it was extrapolated to be offensive as well. Otherwise, the actual bay'ah was defensive. That we will protect you as we protect one of our own. Nothing more. We're not going to go fight on your behalf, but if we are fought, then we will protect you. And so the Prophet ﷺ accepted this bay'ah, and he began sending the people to emigrate. Of course, before he immigrated, of course, there's one final major incident that is very difficult to date, and that is the incident of Isra wal Mi'raj. Probably the most difficult thing to date. Isra wal Mi'raj. Some say it took place in the 3rd year of the Da'wah. Some say the 5th year. Some say the 10th year. Some say the 13th year. Everyone has literally the last year, they say, of the Da'wah of the Meccan Da'wah. There's so many opinions, and it's very difficult to date. But the fact that there's no mention of Khadijah in the incident of Isra helps us to maybe guess that Isra took place after the death of Khadijah. And this would make complete sense as well, because as we said, Isra wal Mi'raj was the greatest personal miracle to the Prophet ﷺ. It's a personal miracle. It's not really a miracle for the rest of us. We just have to believe in it. It's a miracle to him and for him. Personal miracle. And Perhaps it makes complete sense, therefore, to say that he was gifted it when he needed it the most. When did he need it the most? After Ta'if, after Abu Talib, after Khadijah, when literally the Am al-Huzn. And this is what Ibn Ishaq himself surmises, that in that year of sorrow, the lowest of the low, he was literally taken to the highest of the high. He needed to be fortified again. So he's lost Abu Talib, he's lost Khadijah, he's reminded he has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he's taken up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is shown all of the prophets pray behind him, make dua for him, praise him, and all of the miracles happen, as Allah says, لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَةِ رَبِّهِ الْكُبْرَى. And Isra and Mi'raj are two separate things, but they happen the same night, as we said. Isra is the journey to Jerusalem, and Mi'raj is the journey up. And Isra and Mi'raj, because they took place on the same night, so we consider it to be basically one thing, even though there are two separate journeys. And that is, we went over this in 2 or 3 lessons in a lot of detail. And Allah mentions Isra in Surah Al-Isra and Surah Al-Najm, and as Mi'raj is mentioned in Surah Al-Najm. Mi'raj is mentioned in Surah Al-Najm. So Surah Al-Isra and Surah Al-Najm mention these two incidents. And then finally we'll get to the very last thing for tonight, and that is of course where we conclude this summary, and that is the issue of the hijrah itself. That after the Prophet ﷺ had given permission for everybody else to migrate, and slowly but surely Muslims are migrating with difficulty, with problems. Some of them were stopped, some of them had to sell everything that they had. Suhaib al-Rumi, for example, he had to literally give back everything. Some of them had to make promises. A lot of problems happened, but slowly but surely most of the Muslims, if not all of them, they emigrated, until finally the final straw, the Quraysh are terrified that the Prophet ﷺ will leave. So what do? They finally decide to do the dastardly deed, that up until these 13 years, even if a few times they have gotten physical, but still as a tribe they haven't joined against him. Finally, on the very last night of his time in Mecca, they decide this is too dangerous for him to flee. We have to get rid of him before he gets out of here. And so they decide the dastardly deed to assassinate one of their own. And as you all know, they surrounded his house, and that was when Jibreel came down and said, now is the time. And Allah covered up their eyes, blinded them, and the Prophet ﷺ fled in the middle of the night with Abu Bakr, who had already been planning for this, stayed 3 days in Ghar Thawr, and then made their way to Medina. And on the way a number of miracles happened, the story of Suraqa and the story of Ma'bad and other stories, until finally the Prophet ﷺ arrived safely in Medina, in the masjid that was to become the masjid of Quba. And 500 of the Ansar, they came dressed up and armed, and they surrounded the Prophet ﷺ, and they welcomed him, and the men and the women climbed onto the houses, and the streets were basically flooded with joy. And we already sense in the air a whole new time, a whole new era, the beginning of a new dawn, the seed of a new millennia. And the story of that is of course the story post-Hijrah, and that inshaAllah ta'ala we will summarize when we finish the entire Madani Seerah. Then inshaAllah we'll pause, and then we will summarize all of the Madani Seerah in one lesson as well. And with that, inshaAllah ta'ala, really there shouldn't be any questions, right? This is summary. Should be no questions today, correct? Okay, we can take some questions inshaAllah, and then next week inshaAllah we will start the Battle of Uhud, the precursors to the Battle of Uhud, which is the most detailed battle we have. The Battle of Uhud, we have a lot of details for the Battle of Uhud, and a lot of lessons to be drawn from the Battle of Uhud. Any questions about the Meccan or pre-Meccan? Yes?
I have a question. What was the age of Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman compared to the Rasul?
Abu Bakr was 2 years younger. Abu Bakr was 2 years younger. Umar, I will have to look up, 8 or 9 years younger. Umar was 26 when he converted. Umar was 26 when he converted. Uthman, when he passed away, he was 83, so do the math. Uthman was killed when he was 83. Of course, Ali was much younger, because Ali converted at the age of 7 and the Prophet was 40. And so Ali was 33 years younger than the Prophet. As for Uthman, do the math, he was 83, and Uthman was killed 10 plus 12, so 24 CE. So Uthman and the Prophet were roughly similar age, a few years younger, 60 when the Prophet. So the senior, one of the oldest was Abu Bakr, and Uthman were of a similar age.